So let's start off with first, who's this video for?
Okay, this is actually my son and my daughter, Emily Kaplan Dodge and Doug Kaplan, didn't know what to do for my 80th birthday present. So they bought me a bunch of video time, and here I am. And I say 80, it sounds like a really weird number, like it belongs to somebody else. And I mean, it sounds very old, but I don't feel very old. I hope I don't look very old. And I hope that I get a lot older, by the way. Anyway, so I'm going to do this video just for posterity's sake, for my children, for my grandchildren, for their children. And I don't know who else is going to see this thing 150 years from now, but here I am, okay? So I'm Les Kaplan, and my wife, Barbara. We've been married for 51 years. It's been a blast, okay? She's a lot smarter than I am, which is why we probably are happily married, because I listen to her most of the time, okay? But anyway, so I thought I would do this video and so that my kids and their children and everybody would know kind of like where we came from and who I am, at least. And that's where I am. Where I'm concerned, the whole thing started when I started a billboard company. I didn't do that voluntarily. The guy I worked for fired me, even though I was vice president of sales and was 80% of the whole company. We never got along personally. And at that time, nobody had started a billboard company in maybe 50 or 60 years. No one thought there was enough room for another billboard company in the market. By the way, 3 more came after me. So my company was called Philadelphia Outdoor, and I operated it for a little less than 25 years, maybe 2 months less than 25 years. But along the way, neither Douglas nor Emily wanted to get involved in the business, so I knew at some point that I would have to sell it. And at some point, I sort of got tired of working and lost my enthusiasm. Although the company is very successful, we had billboards only on bridges and expressways, which are the highest trafficked arteries. Along the way, we did a lot of estate planning. So when I sold the company, I made sure that Doug and Emily each owned a piece of it so that they wouldn't shoot me for what was left over. And eventually, they would get everything. And in the estate planning, or in the billboard industry, you're always dealing with real estate. You're either buying it and building signs, or you're leasing it and building signs. So I bought as many locations or properties as I could. And along the way, when it came time to sell the company, it was at a time in our industry when there was a tremendous consolidation of companies. For the first time in the history of our industry, some billboard companies started taking their operations public and selling stock. And with that money, they began to acquire little companies like mine. Although my company wasn't that little at the time, but I knew to be a factor in the market or to be an acquisition target, I had to be bigger. So I bought a guy out who was just like me at billboards and expressways and bridges, which are the best locations. And I paid him 6 times his earnings. 4 years later, I sold out for 20 times earnings. But I did something that no one had ever done before. I knew that the company that was buying me out, which was a company called Outdoor Systems, had to get into the Philadelphia market, and they could not get into the Philadelphia market except through me, because the other companies were very large and didn't want to sell out. And I knew that, and they knew that I knew that. They also knew that they were going to sell out at some point. So they didn't care what deal they made. They just wanted to acquire a Philadelphia company. So I told the guy that I was discussing this with that while I would sell him the company, I would sooner cut off his arm than sign a piece of paper that sold the properties we own, the billboards on those properties that we own, or the permits for those billboards. But I would give him effective ownership. And so we negotiated a 20-year lease with 6 5-year options. That's 50 years. By the way, we cross-collateralized all of the leases And that effectively means that if they change one lease, if they modify one billboard, if they violate one permit, we get all the billboards back again. So they really can't do anything to drop a lease or drop a permit because they don't want to lose all those billboards. But if they did, I'd be happy. We'll get them all back again. And along the way, they paid us minimum rents for everything that went up 3% a year every year for 50 years. They never did the math. I did. When they get to about the 30th year, they're going to shoot themselves, okay? Except they will have sold their company by then, so they didn't care, against a percentage of the income, whichever is higher. And we made that deal. So effectively, that means that in, let me see, about 36 years now, about 34 years from now, my children and grandchildren will get a little billboard company back again. Those are the billboards on the properties that we owned, where we had our own billboards and permits, okay? And along the way, they're getting the income from this, because in estate planning, I ended up basically gifting them, or they're technically buying whatever Barbara and I own, so they own everything now. So the great thing about that for me is the satisfaction I get from knowing that I was able to give my kids and their children, and I don't know how long it'll go on, a really stable income at a very nice level. And at some point, they'll get a whole billboard company back again, which they can release or sell. Now, if I did that 50 years or 34 years from now, I would go to billboard companies all around the area and say, here, you got this little billboard company. I'm not going to sell it to you, but I'll lease it to you. And then you can lease it to them. They make no investment, which means that you could probably double the percentage you're charging. So instead of getting 30% rent, you could get 60% rent and let them take 40%, and they pay all the expenses. So we could keep the billboard company forever. Or if they don't want to mess around with it, just sell it outright to somebody, which I really don't think is a good idea because it's providing a great income. And as prices go up, the income goes up. And as the family gets bigger, there'll be more money to distribute. So that's kind of how it all started with the billboards. I guess I could say it started 51 years ago when Barbara and I got married, and we had nothing. And by the way, we had $6,500 in the bank, and my first billboard cost me $6,200 to build. But before I ever built it, I leased it to somebody. I actually was paying a guy $500 a year rent, and I leased it to an advertiser for $850 a month. So I thought, this is a pretty good business. And it went along like that. And how it got bigger was sort of by accident and by design at the same time. Anyway, that's the business end of my life so far. I'm not finished because I may do other things. Who knows? I'm only 80, Got a lot of time.
For a career before the billboard business?
Well, let's see. My dad died when he was 40. I was a teenager. My mom was a cashier in a hardware store. I actually spent my teen life, I grew up in Atlantic City. When I graduated high school, I really hadn't thought about going to college because we were really very poor. We ended up, I ended up going to a school in Trenton, New Jersey called Rider College. And I worked 3 jobs at a time and went to school. Ended up getting thrown out for poor scholarship because who could study if you have 3 jobs? I'd go to school from 8 to 2, work in a factory from 3 to 12 at night. And on Fridays, work from 3 to 12 and 12 to 7 on Saturday because it was double time. So I left there, got in the Army, went into the Army, spent 2 years in the Army, came out of the Army with the GI Bill, went back to the same college, Rider College, which is now Rider University, that threw me out for poor scholarship, and I graduated on Dean's List. And Bob McBain, who was a dean at the time, who let me in and threw me out and let me back in again, said to me, and I'll never forget this, he said, Les, 3 years ago I wouldn't have given you a plug nickel for your graduating. He said, but I got to congratulate you. And we shook hands, and because I graduated on Dean's List. And that's another story, by the way. But it was great. So then when I got out of college, I went to work for a company called Allen & Bacon. Allen & Bacon was a college textbook publishing company. And they published textbooks and sold them to teachers in colleges and high school. So those teachers would use them in their teaching. So I would have to go to some guy who had a doctor's degree in physics and tell him why he should use my physics books, and I didn't know even how to spell physics maybe. But I did, and I was pretty successful. And I left there to go to work for a company called Orion and Batchelder. And that was a company that sold advertising on buses and subways. And by the way, this was all in Philadelphia. Well, for Allen & Bacon, I commuted to New York, but I lived in Philadelphia. And I was selling buses and subways, and someone introduced me to a guy that owned a billboard company who was going to fire a salesman, needed a new salesman, and he hired me. And I was doing that for a while. My wife, Barbara, was a creative director at NWR, which was a very well-known and the largest and first advertising agency in the country at the time. And they're no longer in business. But they were headquartered in Philadelphia. And they wanted my wife, who by that time had become a creative director, the first woman creative director in the agency, maybe the country. And they wanted to move her to New York because that's where they were moving. So I went in to tell the guy I was working for that I'm resigning and want to go to New York. And he asked me, what would it take to make you stay? I said, well, you pay me a salary and every year you throw me a few bucks and we're making a decent living, but I don't have any incentive, So if you want to keep me, I want a title. I want a percentage, a quota based, with a percentage above that. And I want to be vice president of sales because I'm selling 80% of the sales are mine and I'm directing the other salespeople. So that was the deal we made. And the first year after that deal, my income almost doubled. And we moved to New York, and I commuted back to Philadelphia every day for 2 years. So my income almost doubled because I was working on a base and a percentage above the base. And he picked those numbers. I don't want to tell you his name because I don't want to, insult anybody. So he called me in and he said, look, this isn't working. We got to raise your base and lower your percentage. I also had a small percentage of the overall sales. So I said, okay. So he raised my base and lowered my percentage, and my income went up about 50%. Called me in the next year. He said, look, this is not working. I said, well, what's the matter? We're sold out, Every time you build a sign, before you build it, I'm selling it. He said, well, we have to take away your overall commission on sales, and we want to reduce your percentage and raise your base again. I said, okay. So again, my income went up about 30 or 40%. And for some reason, this seemed to bother him. And we never got along on a personal level. There was this feeling he wanted to be deified. And I'm not going to deify anybody. He called me up one morning. He said, my wife and I are going to Florida. Pick us up and take us to the airport. I said, hey, you don't pay me to take you to the airport. You pay me to sell billboards. You go take a cab to the airport. And he did. And I did. But in any event, one day it came to a head, and he threw me out. He told me I was no longer working there. Turns out that he went out of business 2 years after I left. And by the way, when I was there, he used to brag about the fact that we never took cigarette advertising because it was immoral. I once asked him if we could take cigar advertising, and we had a big fight about that, or he had a big fight. But in any event, after I left, he took all the cigarette advertising he could get, and he couldn't get enough because in the end, he went out of business. And I think because he maybe lost somebody who was 80% of the sales of the whole company. That was me. And that's when I started my own company. That was in June of 1973, I think. And no one had started a billboard company in Philadelphia for almost 50 or 60 years at that time because no one thought there was room. But at that point, people in the industry started building on single poles instead of I-beams. So to build a sign, you only needed 5 feet of ground to stick a pole in. And that was the beginning of my business. And The first sign I ever built, the first 2 signs I ever built, were single-pole signs, were on the Roosevelt Expressway, right in front of the front door of his office, right? And every day I come out of the office, you see my 2 signs. The rest is history, I guess. I don't know. But it grew from there, and it really was widely successful, even by my own extraordinary imagination. And when I sold out, we did well. It was a big enough deal to be on CNN and to be in the Wall Street Journal. And every morning I'd get up in the shower, I'd say, oh my God, look at all this money. There were times when I was in college, I had money to eat, and days when I didn't eat. But that's history. There you go.
The CBS come in?
Well, the people that bought me out was a company named, owned the company named Outdoor Systems. And they were the first company in our industry to go public. And with that money they got from selling all the stock, they went around buying up little companies all over the country, which created a buying frenzy because other companies were also very large and were doing the same thing, although they were the first. They were the biggest company in the country with the best sales staff at the time. The second largest company was Eller Outdoor, who eventually sold out to Clear Channel. And on a personal level, the guy that owned Outdoor Systems and Eller Outdoor didn't like each other, and they both emanated from Phoenix, right? So what happened was Outdoor Systems would go to a company like Ford and say, we'll sell you a $50 million package, and Ford would say, I want these 20 markets. But Outdoor Systems could only give them 19 markets. For the 20th market, they'd come to Philadelphia, where Clear Channel was. And Clear Channel would say, wait a minute, we'll give you 12 markets. Why just buy 1 market? But that it would also come to me, and I would give them 1 sign. But in any event, Outdoor Systems knew they had to come into the market. And they knew that they were buying up all these companies, which they would end up selling to somebody else. And the end result was, after they consolidated their business with a bunch of acquisitions, they sold out to Infinity Broadcasting, who sold out to CBS, who sold out to Viacom, who then recreated CBS Outdoor. And CBS Outdoor technically now owns all of the signs that I had sold to them, the leased signs, as well as the signs that were on our own properties, which we still own. But technically, they own them by virtue of the leases they have. But in fact, the properties, the signs, and the permits are still all ours, and my kids are going to get those back again in 2048. That's 50 years from April 8th, 1998 is when I sold out. So that's the story,
Let's talk about your family.
Okay.
Because when I talked to Emily, she actually got a little choked up when talking about you, actually. I actually felt bad because I was just asking her some questions, and she started. She's a very
sensitive kid.
Yeah, and
she's not a kid anymore, by the way. But.
No, and she's a pretty special person too. I got to interview her. She said some things about you, and I just wanted you to respond to them. She
Sure.
said that she said you have the heart of gold, and that you're just incredibly generous, and that you do everything you do is for your kids. And even what you just said had everything to do with your kids.
100%. That's 100%.
Not selfish at all. In fact, he's very selfless. He's a good man with a great sense of humor. He's very, very funny.
My grandchildren think I'm silly, but they laugh.
How would you describe yourself to, let's say, how about this? Maybe you don't have any great-grandchildren. Right?
Not yet.
How about describe yourself to
But I'm only 80. I'm going to be around.
Describe yourself to your future great-grandchildren.
Describe my future great-grandchildren.
Describe yourself.
Well, if they are as warm and loving and decent as my son Doug and my daughter Emily, I would expect nothing less from them. And that's what I think is going to happen. Barbara and I are very, very close to our grandchildren. Unfortunately, Doug lives in Montclair, which is about 90 miles from Philadelphia, so we don't see their children, Doug and Lauren's children, that's Lola and Ryder, as often as we see Emily and Greg's children. that Oliver and Daisy, because it's 90 miles away, but we go there as often as we can. Ollie and Daisy sleep over our house all the time. They have sleepovers all the time. But we also have a beach house where the whole family gathers, both my children and their children and their wives. And we have a house in Florida, and everybody goes there in the wintertime for periods of time. So I grew up with nothing. And as I said, it took me 10 years to work my way through college, 3 jobs at a time. And my dad died when he was very young, and had he lived, it was a very difficult time in those days to get anywhere without a good start. And my mom saw part of my success, and I was able to help her as she got older, and she lived a really great life in her old age. And so now that I have more than I need and more than I want, actually, why not give it to my children? I can only wear so many pair of jeans a day. I can only buy so many sweaters a year. And what's left over is for my children. And that's how I feel, and that's how I operate. Barbara and I, a long time ago, established trust funds for our grandchildren for college. And if things go as planned, and so far they have been, their colleges will already have been paid for. And it gives me a tremendous feeling of satisfaction to be able to do that for my kids. We see Emily and Greg almost every day. And either they're at our house or we're at their house. Their friends are some of our closest friends. We're moving down a generation because who wants to hang out with old people? I don't. And the same with Doug and Lauren. We love to be with our children and grandchildren. And Doug and Emily interact together very well because, frankly, they were raised together in a very warm family, and each did their own thing growing up. Doug did hockey, Em did horses. But they're in business together because they own what Philadelphia Outdoor, which is the name of my company, of the billboard company. They own what was Philadelphia Outdoor. And so they're going to be together for the rest of their lives. Doug my wife, my son, my daughter, and my money all went to Cornell. Em graduated Cornell, and she went to Northwestern and got a master's degree in marketing. Doug graduated Cornell, went to Penn Law School, and became an attorney. He was an attorney in New York for a very large, a very successful law firm. He went on to eventually leave that law firm to help start the legal department in Sirius Satellite Radio, which he operated for a couple of years internally, the department. And then internally resigned from legal and moved over and became senior vice president and head of sports, marketing, and entertainment for Sirius Satellite Radio, and negotiated all the contracts for Sirius. Howard Stern, the NFL, the NHL, all of them. Emily went on to go to a advertising and marketing job in New York. She determined that she didn't like that, and that wasn't her interest. Went to California for a couple of years, studied yoga under Bikram Yoga, came back, started her own studio. She became a trainer. She still owns a yoga studio. She eventually became a certified health and nutrition coach. She has more qualifications than any doctor in the health industry that you'll ever talk to. And today has private clients, does seminars, does webinars. So in their own right, my children are succeeding, finding out what they wanted to do, and they're doing it. Today, Doug is in charge of all of the family assets, all of our investments, all the real estate. And along the way, we acquired some other things, small shopping center and things of that nature, other investments. So Doug's doing that for the family. Emily's doing her thing with health, and she's doing a lot of writing now. I expect sooner or later she's going to be on television because the people that she deals with are all high-level executives, and she saved a lot of lives. So there's that.
Who is Emily?
Okay, Emily's my daughter, Emily Kaplan Dodge. She married Greg Dodge. Greg is in the restaurant industry, has been in that industry since he graduated college, and that's what he went to college for hospitality. and he has a restaurant he started, Zavino, and he's now in the process of building a second one. And if that works, and it seems to be that it will, he's going to roll that out across the country. Emily and he have been married, I guess, almost 10 years. Have a little boy, Oliver, who's 7, and Daisy, 4. Doug married Lauren Hyman. Lauren has a master's degree in psychology, and maybe some facet of psychology, I'm not sure. And long ago, she was ahead of the curve when it came to learning about bullying in the classroom. And years ago, she started dealing with and developing programs to teach teachers and educators how to deal with bullying in the classroom and otherwise. And so she, as a consultant now, does that, and that's what she does for a living. So Doug, well, you asked me about Emily, and now he ran on to Doug, but I have 2 children. I try to treat them equally, right?
Can you recount a fond memory?
We started a hockey team in Lakeland, Florida, in the Southern Hockey League. Beautiful arena. Doug grew up playing hockey his whole life. He was the manager of the Cornell hockey team when he went to Cornell, because he wasn't quite good enough to play with the kids that they recruited from Canada. But he was a manager there, right? And he skated with them and played with them. And eventually got to New York, became an attorney. Took a leave of absence when we started the hockey team, and he became general manager of the Lakeland Prowlers. Emily has a master's degree in marketing. She and Douglas were living in Lakeland. She moved down there and did all the marketing for the team. Barbara and I were involved in it peripherally, but we were having fun building this team. Doug hired a coach, and the 2 of them together built the most successful hockey team in the history of minor league hockey. We were 24-4-2 at home. We won the league by 15 points. We had the number 1 and number 2 goalies. We had the most points scored for us and the least points against us. We were the least penalized team. And the league voted 4 awards. They voted the Rookie of the Year, Defenseman of the Year, MVP, and Coach of the Year. And the league voted all of those awards to the Lakeland Prowlers. We couldn't get Publix, the biggest shopping center in the South, to buy 2 season tickets for $250 apiece to give to the employee of the month to come to a game. We just couldn't get anybody in Lakeland interested in hockey. So, theoretically, Doug said, this is not actually, but he said, theoretically, he said, look, as a family, we had $1 million worth of fun, and all it cost was $750,000. So we lost a substantial amount of money, not that, but we had a great time, and we worked together. It's another thing we did as a family. And today, 15 years later or more, let me see, about 15, we're still in touch with some of those players and the players' wives. It was a great family experience.
Tell me about the little ones. Tell me about
Okay.
Emily's and Greg's kids, Oliver and
Okay.
Daisy.
2 great
Said they were
kids.
your household.
Ollie, it's like raising 2 more children, and we love it, except we don't have the responsibility. We just kind of ship them home. A lot of times we can't ship them home. They stay over. But we're very, very close to them. I teach Ollie about baseball. I've taken him ice skating, teach him how to skate. We play basketball together. And Daisy and Barbara do all kinds of interesting things, drawing and maybe making cookies and stuff, because Daisy's more interested in that. Although she herself is a good athlete, by the way. But Barbara's also very much the intellect. She's probably read every book that's ever been written, and she probably remembers every word of every book she's ever read. So it's very hard to win an argument. I don't think I've won an argument in 51 years, but the kids are great, and we're very close to them. We're also very close to Lola and Ryder. That's Doug and Lauren's children, although we don't see them as often. But when we do see them, we're with them for longer periods of time, because we're either at the beach house together for a week, long weekends, or maybe a week or 2 weeks, and in Florida for Christmas to New Year's. And then we go up to see them for birthdays and stuff like that, and they come down for birthdays. Interestingly, since we were so close physically to Ollie and Daisy, And I felt like I was missing something with Lola and Ryder. So one day we were Skyping. I was Skyping with Lola, and I said, "Do you want to play a card game?" And Lola was only about 3 or 4 at the time. She said, "Yeah." So I got a deck of cards. I said, "We're going to play fish." And I picked up 5 cards, and I showed her cards. And I said, "You have to ask me if I have one of those in my hand," right? And meanwhile, the cards, she can't see them. In front of me, laying on the desk, face up, were the rest of the cards. And so she would say to me, "Do you have any 5s?" I would say, "Wait a minute, let me see." Of course, I come down, "Oh, I have a 5. Here's a 5, right?" So we began to play fish. After all, that got boring. So I said, "How about if I show you a card trick?" So she said, "Okay." Meanwhile, by this time, Ryder is also looking at on Skyping, and he's seeing card tricks. So I showed her a couple of card tricks. Well, it happens that my brother Harold, who's married to Rosalind, right, lives in Orlando, and he has 2 grandchildren, Sarah's and Cooper, and they're about 16 and 14. And Sarah's is a very accomplished magician. And one of the biggest magic stores in the country is Daytona Magic, which is half an hour from where they live. So I called Sarah up. I said, "Sarah, I need some magic tricks. How do I get a magic trick?" Because I wanted to show Lola a magic trick. So he put me in touch with Daytona Magic. And I got friendly with the guy who owns it, who happens to be from Philadelphia. So I called him up. I said, "I need magic tricks, but it's got to be simple. I'm not a magician. It's got to be something for my grandchildren who are 5, 6, 7 years old can see." So we organized 2 or 3 tricks. And I began to do magic tricks on Skype. And they loved it. And then, of course, Ollie and Daisy would come over to the house, and I would do the same magic tricks for them. Well, eventually, they got tired of those magic tricks. So little by little, I kept getting more magic tricks. And today, I have about 15 tricks. I am a magician, and I could probably put on my own show. And I've begun to teach them how to do the magic tricks. Although a good magician doesn't tell people how to do tricks, it's okay for your grandchildren. So now, as they learn a new trick and they practice it, and when they accomplish it, I give them another trick. So today, Lola and Oliver each have 2 tricks that they've accomplished. I'm about to do a 3rd one with them when I see them all together this Christmas in Florida. And Daisy and Ryder is now doing magic tricks. He takes a deck of cards and throws them up in the air, and that's his trick, and you got to pick them up.
What do you think the grandkids are going to grow up to become?
Well, yeah, that's tough to say because they're so little, and life is so funny. It takes you in directions that you never expect. And I don't know what I want to do when I grow up. So I don't know how to answer that question except to say that whatever they do, I'd like them to be successful. I'd like them to be happy. And I'd like them to do what they really want to do in life rather than what they may have to do in life. And if those things happen to them, I'll be thrilled on their behalf. And maybe the 4 of them can do something together. I don't know. They can start a candy store. But in the meantime, I can't really predict, but I'm just hopeful that they do well and they're happy.
It doesn't make money while you're asleep, then don't do it.
No, what I said was, if it doesn't make money when you're sleeping, don't do it. And of course, neither of my kids listened to me. Douglas became a lawyer, and lawyers work by the hour. Emily became a yoga instructor and a personal trainer, and she worked by the hour, okay? And today, Emily on a much higher level because she's now has certifications for all kinds of nutrition and health, and she knew about foods long before you started hearing about coconut oil, juice, and stuff like that, and green drinks. There's a green drink named after Emily at the farmer's market in Ormore. They call it Emily because she was the first one to teach them how to do that. And now everybody drinks it, okay? So what I meant was, look, I owned a billboard company, and I went out, and I sold a guy, at the time I started, 3-year contracts were not uncommon. So I would sell a 3-year contract to a Ford Motor Company, and I would never have to see them again for 3 years. So while I was sleeping, the billboards were making money. So effectively, that's what I was kind of saying to them. But I mean, that's very hard to do, but it's a great line.
How about, she also said that you're doing a lot of research recently into your genealogy, the where your ancestors came from and stuff like that. So, I mean, this is very interesting stuff. Can you tell your family, where did your family start?
Well, Well, growing up, when I was a kid, I knew my grandfather and my grandmother, and they both died at a relatively young age. But I never really got to know any of I didn't know they had brothers and sisters. I didn't know if they had them or where they had them, okay? So I basically didn't know anybody. But that was at a time when a lot of people didn't have telephones. It wasn't like you could pick up a phone or jump in a car or Skype So at some age, I realized that I had missed something in my life. I didn't know any cousins or uncles or aunts or anybody. On my mother's side, I did. My mother had 5 sisters and a brother, and they all lived near each other, and I got to know my cousins on that side, but not on my father's side. My father had a brother and a sister, but his brother had a falling out with the family and changed his name and drifted away from the family. And although he had 2 children, he and his wife, Fred and Wendy Copeland, he changed his name from Kaplan to Copeland. I never really got to know them. So one day, a couple of years ago, I decided I want to know where my grandfather came from. Did he have any brothers and sisters? This is on my father's side. So I ended up at the customs house in Philadelphia, and I looked through ship's records, and I found the ship's log for the ship that my grandfather actually came on from Lithuania. He was born in Siredzius, which is now called Serednik is now called Siredzius in Lithuania. And I also found the ship's log for my grandmother. And on those logs, you had to fill out your name and where you were from and where you were going and who you were going to see and what you did for a living, who your mother and father were. I found that my grandfather was born in Lithuania, in Serednik, and he was coming to see your brother Louis. I never heard the name Louis in my life. I tried to find out who Louis was. I couldn't do it. So, at that time, I didn't research my grandmother's family. Her maiden name was Katowski. But on my father's side, I eventually found out that not only did my grandfather have 1 brother, but he had 4 brothers and 2 sisters. So I consider them the original Kaplans, okay? Although I got back to their father and mother and to the father's father. So I got back basically 8 generations in my family on my father's side into the 1700s. And I did this eventually with the help from a woman in California who was a genealogist whose husband's family came from Lithuania, and they had visited there. And she, I guess, was a lawyer originally and was very research-oriented. So between the information I was able to give her at the time, and I got past the ship's log for a while, I got into some cemetery records and stuff. 2 years later, or 2.5 years later, which is now, I've a family tree 8 generations deep, going back to the 1700s. And in order to see it, to blow it up big enough to read, it's about 4 feet high and about 1.5 feet wide. And then what I did was I found out the brothers got married, the sisters got married, they had children, okay? So now I began to look for the children. And I've gotten to know probably 35 or 40 first cousins once removed, second cousins, third cousins, great aunts, great-great aunts. Two of them are still alive. One just died. And I began talking to them and sending them copies of the family tree and sending them stories about the family that we uncovered in our research from Europe. And so they're blown away because none of them knew they had any relatives, or at least not many relatives. And one of the original sisters had 9 children. Well, if you start with 9 children and each have 2 children each apiece, I mean, it's like 18 right there, and it multiplies. It compounds, sort of like the minimum rents and the billboards are compounding, which CBS is going to find out about in 10 years. Anyway, so that was that. So then I thought, well, I'd do my grandmother's family. And the same thing happened. I didn't know she had brothers and sisters. She had one brother that married somebody's sister, and the sister's brother married my grandmother's sister. So there was like an exchange of brothers and sisters in the family, right? And along the way, there were a lot of name changes. and because of marriages, and some people, for instance, my grandmother had a brother whose name was Katowski, he changed it to Katovsky. Another guy changed his name to Cohen. Well, my grandfather, whose name in Lithuania, his name was Wolf, V-U-L-F. On the ship's log, they called him Well, which then, when he got to this country, became William, right? Well, it turned out that his name, Wolf, from the old country, was the same name as his father. And if you're Jewish, you don't name somebody the same name if they're living. Turned out that his father died before he was actually born, so that when he was born, his mother named him Wolf after his father. Something that no one ever, certainly never knew it. They also had a child that died at 6 months of age. Another child that died from 14 years of age. So, but I learned all this in doing the research. It's fascinating. And I have in part I've done that on my mother's side of the family, but I haven't gotten back as many generations yet. And I'm about to start that. But so anybody in my family can get a copy of the Kaplan family tree, which is now its 8th version, or the Katowski family tree, which is in his 4th version, and the stories that go along with that. And there are some interesting stories. and soon I'll be able to do the Millmans, which is my mother's side of the family. And my mother's name, Rushkovsky. I haven't gotten there yet, but that'll be the next one. Somehow, and I don't know how, some of the brothers came to this country and ended up in Minnesota, right, in the dry goods business. And the rest of them ended up in Philadelphia, except for brother Jacob. Nobody could find out what happened to Jacob, or even if there was a Jacob. And it took me a year to figure out that Jacob came to this country with a family that the Kaplan family was friendly with, and he took their name in order to get on the ship for some reason, and he traveled under their name. And then when he came to this country, he changed his name to Cohen, and finally we found Jacob Cohen, right? I mean, that's one of the things. But there's one of our ancestors whose family was killed in the Holocaust in a little town called Jurbarkas. Some of the people escaped, and the people who escaped eventually went back to the town to find out that the Germans had destroyed it, but they also destroyed the cemetery. And each person alive at the time wrote a story, a one-page story about his life in Jurbarkas. And I'm trying to remember for the life of me, I can't remember. He was a Kaplan, but I can't remember his first name. It's back 3 generations. He got other members of the Jewish community together, and they rebuilt the cemetery. And today, if you go to Jurbarkas, you'll see a cemetery there. So,
Very cool.
all right. But there are a couple of other stories. But years ago, they were butchers. They were spice salesmen. They sold dry goods, okay? None of them, to my knowledge, ever became a politician or a president, that kind of thing. But everybody worked for a living, and they were carpenters, They just made a living. In those days, you did what you had to do.
If you were going to do a top 10 list, the top 10 list are things that happened to you in your life.
Oh, God.
What would your top 10 list? You don't need to come up with 10, but in that spirit, what would the top 10 things in your life be?
Top 10 things. Well, first of all, being married for 51 years to the same woman, and what a great person. Okay, top 10 is my children and my grandchildren. Okay, having started a business from scratch and built it and sold it for the kind of sale price that it was, it's just totally blows me away, boggles my mind. When I was younger, I didn't realize this till I was older. I was a very poor student. I graduated 350th out of a class of 356. But I never cut school. I didn't hang out with the wrong crowd. I wasn't a bad kid. I always went to school. But for some reason, I couldn't learn. And looking back, I vaguely remember when I was probably in 3rd or 4th grade, somebody took me to the cloakroom in the back of a classroom and asked me a lot of questions, was testing me about something. So I knew that from a very early age, there probably was something wrong. I've often wondered if I could go to my records from 1945 and see what that was all about. But I was either dyslexic or I had attention deficit disorder. Because it wasn't that I didn't want to learn, it's just that I couldn't learn. And so when I graduated from high school, let alone not being able to afford to go to college, I never thought about college because no one ever asked me about college. One day, this was in May of the year I graduated in 1951 at Atlantic City High School, I was with my friend Jerry Galula in his apartment in Atlantic City, and we were sitting around talking. He said, where are you going to go to college? I said, I don't know. No one ever asked me that question before. I don't know where to go to college. He said, well, there's a college in Trenton that you might be interested in going to. And he told me Trenton State Teachers College. So I said, okay. So I wrote a note on a little piece of tablet paper to Trenton State Teachers College, asking them, could I go to college? I mean, I really didn't understand what was going on. And there were no SATs and things at that time. So it turned out that by accident, the post office gave the letter to the people at Rider College. And so it was Rider College that contacted me, then let me in on probation, okay? And that's, my vague memories of my dad and mom. At that point, my father maybe had another few months to live at the time, but we didn't know that. Were driving me to college, and I got a room in the third floor attic of somebody's house in some side street. And that's where I was living. So getting into college was a huge, amazing thing to me as I look back on it. Even more amazing was that I went back and graduated on Dean's List. Okay, so that was pretty good. So how many is that? What are we up to?
You're like 6 or 7, I think.
6 or 7,
Yeah.
okay.
How about give me a memory of mom and dad?
My mom was the sweetest lady you'll ever talk to. She was uncompromising in her love for her children, never critical about anything, loved her grandchildren and they loved her, played games with them all the time. But she had a tough life. We moved from Philadelphia to Atlantic City, and my mom and dad opened a luncheonette, which failed. That's when my father became a door-to-door salesman. My mother went to work in a hardware store. And one of the nice things in my life was as she got older, I was in a position to move her back to Philadelphia, to move her into an apartment building where she owned an apartment, where her sisters owned apartments. And to her, that was great because they all had money. And they really didn't, but in her mind, they did. They were able to afford more. So put her on a level that she never was on before. And my dad was just a tough guy. He was a carpenter. I remember I must have been 6 or 7 or 8 years old and went to work with him one day. And he put up drywall. And I was banging some drywall and hit the hammer on my thumb, and I got a little blood clot on my thumb. I'll never forget that. But my mom and dad both graduated high school, which at the time was a big deal. I played catch with him, and he was an avid fisherman. He would go fishing in the middle of the winter in a snowstorm, right? And he was just had a tough life growing up. He was drafted into the Army, standing on the train station platform, kissing us goodbye to go into the Army. There was an announcement over the loudspeaker that said, everybody who's over 30 has been drafted, go home. We're not taking anybody over 30 anymore. So my father packed up and went home. Never got in the Army. Oh, God. So many memories. I can't really pick one, but, among Emily growing up, her hobby was riding horses. She rode horse shows all over the country. She was very, very talented and won a lot of awards, a lot of ribbons and stuff like that. I mean, in a sense, when you're kids in the equestrian business, so to speak, it's like watching the grass grow. You spend hours and hours waiting for her to ride. She rides, it takes 30 seconds, she's done, she's out of there. But my fondest memories of her riding, obviously, and I went to probably every horse show that she was ever in that I was available to go to. The same with Doug. Every hockey game he ever played in, I have videos of. At the time, you had video cameras on your shoulder. My arm would be, I couldn't get off at this level because it got so sore. So I have, and they have those videotapes, hours and hours of themselves as kids. So watching her doing that was fun. Even more fun, and she, they were 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, was watching her with her girlfriends, not riding horses, but putting bags and ropes down on the ground between waiting for your turn to ride and jumping over those like you're riding on horses. I mean, and I have that on videotape. And as far as Doug is concerned, for the same question, it was all the hockey games I ever saw him playing. He was always the smallest kid on the ice. And at the end, and I coached his teams. I also played hockey with Doug at night for open hockey, adult hockey. And I would write little write-ups for each of the kids on the team and give them to him at the end of the year. And for Doug, one year I wrote that he had 3 speeds: slow, slower, and slowest. But you could not get the puck away from him. And every time he went into the corner to fight for the puck, everybody was in the corner and he was in the middle of the ice with the puck. I could never figure out how come he always came out with the puck. So even though he was the smallest, slowest kid on the ice, he was always the high scorer on the team or the highest assist maker on the team because he set up other people. And today, some of the kids that he played with when he was 12, 13, 14, 15 years old are Barbara's and my best friends. Chris Caba, we watched him raise his family and 4 kids, and still comes and has dinner with us for Thanksgiving, not Thanksgiving, but for family occasions, and we play golf together. And Josh Peterson, who I lost track with Josh for like a number of years, and one day I get a phone call, he says, "It's Josh Peterson, I want to come over and talk to you." I said, "Oh, Josh, great, come on over and talk." He said, "I only came over to tell you one thing." He said, all those years when we were growing up, and Josh was the fighter on the team, he would get in a fight if a kid tied his shoelace wrong, okay? And he eventually became an enforcer in a minor league hockey team. But he's now a very successful real estate executive. And he came to the house and he said, "I just came over to tell you that I want all the things that you told me that I was growing up that I never listened to. I want you to know that I must have heard you, because now that I think about it, I want to thank you for all the things that you told me and the things that you try to do for me. And I want you to know that made a difference in my life." And I was in tears, right? And so today I'm friendly with Josh. So a lot of the kids that Doug and Emily grew up with, we're still friendly with. That's another generation, right? And they don't look at me as an old guy. They look at me as sort of an equal, I guess. I don't know. I'm afraid to ask, but it's nice being able to move down a generation. And Barbara and I both have done that.
Tell me a little about Uncle Harold.
Well, it's funny what I didn't know about my brother that I found out recently, years later, but because my brother's 2 years younger than I. He was sort of built like my father. He was taller than I and huskier. And I was built like my mother, smaller and slender. And we played basketball together, and he was probably a better basketball player than I, but because of his size, and he could push people around. I couldn't. I did it with finesse. But I won a lot of trophies. But we played baseball together, and we grew up together. And then eventually, one of my experiences, he went to college. He went to Rutgers. He was accepted to a number of colleges, universities, but he couldn't afford to go. He went to Rutgers, which was a state university. Worked in a hospital as an orderly. Now, I never knew that. I was working in a paper tube factory at night from 3 to 12, Monday to Friday, and 3 to 7 Saturday morning on Saturdays or Friday night, and working my way through college. And he was working in a hospital as an orderly doing the same thing. I never knew that. Anyway, so we both grew up, and neither of us knew that we were avid golfers until we got to be older. And today we play golf, and he plays in my member guest, I play in his. We've won 4 or 5 member guest tournaments together. And he lives in Orlando. He started when he was fired from a company, an equipment leasing and finance company. He started his own. He has a very successful equipment leasing and finance company in Orlando, United Financial Group. His son now is the president of the company and runs everything. Excuse me. And while my brother still owns the majority of the company, he doesn't run anything anymore. His son Andrew runs it. So in his own right, he grew up to be successful, and he's very active at Rutgers, and he's on a number of different major committees there, and so he's in the area often. So he always comes over to see Doug and Emily and their children if he's in New York or Philadelphia. By the way, Doug and Barbara are very active at Cornell. They're both on Cornell Council. Barbara's on a number of committees, as is Doug. We got some stuff named after us at Cornell. We have some stuff named after us at Rider, right? Emily is not so involved, although she is involved in the family stuff at both of those schools. So my brother in his own right became successful. And that was a surprise to me as well, and to him, because we both came from nothing, And we lived in Atlantic City in the inlet, and at the time we lived there, the inlet is where the poor people in Atlantic City lived. Well, we lived so far in the inlet, they still haven't discovered it yet. I mean, that's how far into the inlet we were. But it was great, because if I didn't live in Atlantic City, I would probably have never known what an ocean looked like, or a beach. But as it was, in the summertime, there was always a job to be had. I was a lifeguard, a swimming and diving instructor, a short order cook, and there were girls all over the place. And it was a great social life. And the negative part of the social life is if you met a girl, usually that's what you're looking for as a teenager, you only knew her for a weekend, a week, a couple of weeks, a month. So everything was fast. And maybe my whole life was kind of like that, which is why I do quick repartee a lot, and it comes easily, because of having grown up like that. But it was great. And I was able to save money, and in part, that's how I went to college. So
yeah. I heard you like to golf.
Well, if I didn't have golf, I wouldn't have anything to do. But the thing is that people look at me, and I'm not young. I'm an old guy, right? And in Florida, there's a section of a hallway where my dresser and stuff is. It's filled with golf awards. My brother and I last year won the Trump Cup at Trump International, which is like the big 3-day member guest there. And so I won it in 2001 with another guy, and I won it in 2012 with my brother. Right? We won in his club. We won a couple of member guests. There was a 3-day member. I can't tell the number of 1-day member guests I won. And so what it is, I can't hit the ball so far anymore because I just don't have the strength or the ability to turn, because along the way, about 10 years ago, I had spinal stenosis. So they cut the bone spurs around my spine and put 2 rods down my back. And so I can't turn as much as I could before, so I can't hit it as far. But you don't want to play me for money from 150 yards in. That I can tell you, because you never lose that. I got down to be like a 9 handicap for maybe 5 minutes, but mostly I was at 10 or 11. But speaking of my operation, and Emily and Barbara will cringe at this, a funny thing came out of this operation, which is really very difficult, because for 6 weeks you're in a full neck brace. You eat in it, you shower in it, you sleep in it, you can't turn over in bed, and you count every second of every day. You can't wait for the days to end. Finally, after 6 weeks, you go back to the doctor to see if he can take the brace off, if you're healed. I went back to the doctor, took the brace off. He showed me my x-rays. He said, look at these nice rods, look at these aren't these nice looking screws, right? Aren't they in the right place? And he was proud of his work. And he said to me, his little joke, this little fat 70-year-old doctor, and he said, now you can do anything you want. You can drive your car, you can play golf, you can even have sex, he tells me. I said, hey, wait a minute. If I can have sex, go back to the office. I want a prescription for a 35-year-old blonde. So he laughs, right? And it was an offhand comment, but in any event, a couple of weeks later, I'm in Whole Foods Market. I'm shopping, and I get to the counter to check out, and this cute little girl is doing the scanning. And they don't really look at you. They're just scanning items. And she says, by rote, did you find everything you wanted, sir? I said, no, I'm looking for a 35-year-old blonde, but you're out of them. So she smiles at me, and she looks up, and she says, well, you're late. We had a buy one, get one free sale, and they're all gone. And that's a true story.
Before you want to go.
I put that on my list of top 10. I had a tough life growing up. It was a warm, wonderful family life, but it was tough. And so when I was able to, I gave my children everything I was able to give them. I want them to know that I love them, no matter what faults they have, if any, and I haven't found any, okay? And no matter what they do, I'll support them and stand behind them. And that goes for my children and grandchildren and future generations and beyond. And I want them to succeed beyond where I succeeded and do for their children what I've done for mine, what I've tried to do for mine, okay? And just know one day, I'm finally figuring out that there's an end. It never occurred to me there's an end before. But it's, since there's, I figure everybody's dying, so it can't be all bad, right? They're all doing it. And so when they put me in a casket someplace, at least once a year, I hope they'll come to visit my grave just to try to remember and who I am and what I did. And some of the memories that they have of their family will maybe come to them. And, I've always tried to do what I could, and I'll always do that for them. I don't know what else I can say to them. I love them. I wish them to succeed and to help their family succeed and to just love each other. Because in the end, that's all you have is each other. And that goes for my wife, too. That's it. I don't know what else. I'd like to say more, but I'm afraid to because I'll start crying. And I don't want to cry in this video. Well, maybe a little bit. So that's the story, okay?
I think that was fantastic.
But there's more. There's more. we haven't done chapter 2 yet. That's only chapter 1. But before we stop, I really want to say thanks to Doug and Lauren and Emily and Greg for thinking of a really interesting and neat 80th birthday present for me. And it's been fun, and I hope I didn't embarrass anybody. And I love you all, and I love all our grandchildren and their children. And, well, time immemorial. In any event, stay well, keep in touch with each other, and stop and see me once a year and bring me up to date on everything so I'll know what's going on, all right? Because I believe in an afterlife, so I'm going to be watching. I won't be critical, but I'll be watching, okay? So that's about it. There's not much more I can tell you. Thanks a lot for the help. Appreciate it.